Welcome to the second episode of our pre-concert talks. Today we'll be learning more about the composers and pieces that were performed on the 29th of January 2026 by the BBC Symphony Orchestra. This talk is hosted by Bill Chandler, joined by Rose Hinton and Sakari Orama.
Welcome to tonight's concert. My name is Bill Chandler. I'm director of the BBC Symphony Orchestra and Chorus. And to my left is Rose Hinton, sub-principal second violin in the orchestra.
Hello.
And our chief conductor, Sakari Orama, who'll be conducting tonight.
Good evening.
It's a pleasure to be returning to the Anvil in Basingstoke and with such a beautiful program of lyrical music. One thing that is for me a real highlight is the concerto on tonight's program, Brahms Violin Concerto. And one of the things I noticed when we set up this talk was that it's not often you get three violinists in a pre-concert talk panel. But in actual fact, I was, for most of my career, a violinist in orchestras in this country as well as in North America. And I don't think any violin, and of course Sakari still plays as well as conducts, and Rose, of course, you'll hear later on tonight. But I don't think there's any violinist in the profession who doesn't have some kind of relationship with the Brahms Violin Concerto. And I thought it might be really interesting to sort of put my guests on the spot right now and say, you know, what is it about the Brahms Violin Concerto? When did you play it?
So the Brahms I performed in my last year when I was at Cheetham School of Music. I think when you learn a piece at that time of your life, you study it for a long time and you study it so well and you listen to it and you study the score. I was lucky enough to perform it with a brilliant amateur orchestra in Suffolk, where I'm from, the Wolsey Orchestra in Ipswich. I think it just stays with you. It sort of becomes embedded in your mind forever, really, in a special way. So as soon as we started rehearsing this piece, or whenever I've played it in the orchestra, all of that just comes back straight away. And it's a joy performing it once again with Hana.
Oh, fantastic. Sakari, what about you?
Well, I did play the concerto. I did study it in my studying times, which are already way back in history, in the 1980s, I suppose it was. And of course, since then, I have also conducted the piece many, many times with different soloists. It's always a joy because Brahms gives the orchestra so much meaningful to play. There's actually an anecdote that Kaupo de Sarasate, who was a famous Spanish violin virtuoso in the time, said, why would I stand on the stage for 4 minutes whilst the oboe is playing the only melody in the piece? and because Brahms gives the oboe in the orchestra a really fantastic, beautiful solo and melody. And I guess Sarasate felt sort of in his aesthetics, this was like slightly overstepping the mark and giving too much role for the orchestra. But of course, we as orchestral musicians, we love that.
Yeah, we do. We'll come on to that in a little while. My experience actually is a bit more like Rose's. I played it I can even tell you the year. It was 1985, and I won a concerto competition at the music college, and I managed to play it with the college orchestra at the time. And it was always a piece that I always wanted to play. It was in my dreams all the time to play it. And it's interesting now when you hear it every time, like Rose mentioned, it stirs memories. You start thinking about the past and you start thinking about what it feels like to play a piece like that. And it's quite a chunky piece, and in some ways maybe differs from the other violin concertos. I know when it was written, it was very popular straight away, although it had its detractors, Sarasate not the only one, but Joachim was key to its success, who was one of the greatest violinists of his time. I wonder if every concerto has a star behind it like that, and what that relationship is like. Sakari, do you come across that aspect of this piece?
Absolutely, and certainly in the Romantic era, meaning later part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, most instrumental concertos were written for someone, and that tradition actually continues even in our days. And of course, composers are at an advantage if they know who they are writing for, because they can also, whether they choose to interact during the composition process or not is a different thing. I think Joseph Joachim had a great influence on the solo part. But I think Brahms also had his doubts, because Joachim's playing playing style was kind of quite old-fashioned. He didn't use any vibrato, and I think Brahms wondered whether Joachim is actually dramatic enough for the piece.
Interesting. Drama. What do you think is the most important thing for a soloist to bring to a piece like this? I mean, we're talking about a piece that's 40 minutes long or something like that. It's symphonic length in a way. I don't know. Rose, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I remember very well, just finding the stamina required to perform something like this, to memorize a piece like this and respond to all of the orchestral writing in the way that it should be done. Very demanding, and I don't know. I mean, it's such a well-loved work for a reason, and I think there's something about Hana's playing that I find, along with Sakari's direction, just sort of effortless to go along with, because it's sort of this wonderfully classic version, nothing sort of overdone. It's sort of everywhere you'd expect it to be. Her interpretation, and I think maybe you don't need to try to do too much new with a piece like this. I think it sort of stands and speaks for itself.
Yeah, interesting. Maybe that's why Sarasate didn't like the piece so much, because it didn't give him the room to
possibly
be himself.
Yes, the composer of the gypsy songs, Zigeunerweisen, Sarasate. It's more improvisatory, I think, and it was really interesting process with Hana Chang. We haven't worked together before. She's a young soloist, up and coming, one of the BBC's young artists,
new generation
artists.
Right, yeah.
And I went to see her before the first rehearsal, and we just decided together that okay, we don't talk about the piece. We just go into the orchestra and make music together. And sometimes it's a lucky decision, sometimes not. This time it was, because it's really natural, and I think the communication between her and the orchestra and myself runs really smoothly and beautifully.
Nice, that's great. I think one of the things this is an orchestra of professionals, of course, and we come with enormous amounts of experience and preparation behind us, and it's something we take very seriously. But we can never underestimate the fact that this is live music and it's being made in the moment, and you're there to witness that, which of course means anything can happen. But I think that is part of the mystery and the chemistry of live music, and it's one of the most interesting parts about it. You mentioned earlier about this oboe solo and the melodies. This is certainly a very lyric piece in many, many ways. And I also mentioned that the scale of it. You talked about it. Hang on, you were at Cheethams. That means you were a teenager when you played this monster of a concerto. Is that right?
Yeah, I was in my final term.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Incredible. It is a mountain almost, but it was written at a time when Brahms was very happy. He was having a fantastic period in his life. He was spending time out in the Wörthersee, and he was enjoying life. And he just finished his second symphony, the D major symphony, probably the sunniest of all of his works. I can't help but draw comparisons to the fact that this feels like a symphony with someone sort of playing some of the melodies on their own occasionally. Is that how you view this piece? Do you approach this different than you would, say, a Brahms second symphony, which we're doing not too far along from now?
Actually, quite similar. Of course, there is a soloist to be taken account, but I think all of Brahms's concertos are, in a way, very symphonic works. The two piano concertos, both actually, are very, very symphonic, and even the late double concerto for violin and cello, they all share kind of this similar aesthetic, that the orchestra gets an unusually big role, and the soloists are kind of drawn into the flow of the orchestra.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Before we play the Brahms violin concerto, we have an opening piece by a composer maybe unfamiliar to you, Cecilia Danström, who's written a piece called Ice, and it has a couple of connotations. I wonder, Sakari, you might share a little bit about why is it called Ice?
Well, ice, first of all, frozen water, which is abundant in the composers and my homeland in Finland, still. But she also gave it another meaning, which is in case of emergency. And this piece is a reflection on the climate catastrophe that we are facing. At least most people think we are facing. And certainly the composer feels it very strongly. And I think she has composed into the music this kind of the essence of what ice is like as a material. And a lot of ice that exists on the planet is actually millennia old. Like if you think about the ice in Greenland or in the North Pole or elsewhere in such places, Siberia as well, it's like ancient water that's been frozen. And what we as mankind have sort of achieved is that ice is melting away very quickly and threatens to have all sorts of implications in our ecosystems, in our food production, in our lives, nature, to the planet, to our cities, some cities which might drown and so on. So it's kind of, I think the composer has sort of reflected on this very strongly. I have to say it is a very strong piece. So be prepared, because it's not easy listening. It's really strong material. But if you imagine that you hear ice written into music and ice crystals and the sort of sheer hardness of ice, I think that's very well depicted in the music.
Interesting. I was going to ask you about that because I listened to a little bit of rehearsal earlier, and first listening, I'm thinking, wow, this sounds very abstract in many ways. But in actual fact, it's not abstract at all. It's actually quite a clear picture that she's writing about. I hear that. I don't know if that's something that you notice in this piece, Rose, about the fact that she's really writing about the disappearance of ice. And from what I understand of the piece, it starts with really long gestures that gradually get shorter and shorter as the piece goes on. And in a way, this is the ice disappearing. And so as it disappears, it creates all sorts of problems for us.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Sakari's point about how it's quite hard. It's a hard, strong piece. It's I think it really compels you to listen, and I think that's what she's looking for. These effects that she's included, you'll hear these extended techniques that we often perform with lots of new commissions in this orchestra, are sometimes quite difficult to understand, but once you know what the composer's asking for, it can actually be quite liberating. You know, when we're always being asked to play beautifully, in this piece we start with the long notes, but a quarter tone apart. So, you know, if it were a classical piece, you'd think we're just not playing very well in tune with each other. But this is, of course, necessary for the kind of dis-ease she's wanting us to feel. And later on, she actually writes, I think it's something like, gradually play as ugly as possible by, you know, really in the strings, increasing the pressure of the bow. So you're really pressing and cracking the sound, and you get this kind of sinister sound of the ice cracking and crunching and, I guess, breaking before it melts. And what's really interesting is when you're performing in your seat, you can't always understand, or you can't always grasp the entire picture of the sort of magic and the atmospheres that these effects create. But when you listen back to the recordings, I'm looking forward to doing that, or as an audience member, you'll hear the whole sort of organism of this picture of the ice, and it can be really quite magical, actually. So
fantastic. No, looking forward to it.
You will also hear a bicycle bell being played by Alex, our percussionist, and I guess its role is to sort of depict an alarm bell that is sounding in the distance somewhere. It's not very loud. It's not a very loud instrument in the orchestral context, but you will certainly hear it. And I think it's a nice little touch from the composer to use something as unusual as that.
Yeah, interesting. Also, I did a little digging into her past works, and this isn't the first time that she's been inspired by nature or by political events or various things. Cecilia's also written a piece called Requiem for Our Earth on a similar title, and also a piece called Information, which is actually about disinformation, which is topical for the time. And I think it's fascinating when we recognize that art can be a place where we actually talk about things. I'm reminded of a quote, forgive me if I've told you this story already, Sakari. Rose, I don't think I have, but Yo-Yo Ma came to London a few years back. It's so far long ago that it was Andrew Marr on the Sunday morning show, and he played some solo Bach beautifully. And then they had an interview afterwards, and Andrew Marr was asking him about his humanitarian work, which Yo-Yo Ma is very famous for. And he talked about the fact that he'd spent 60 plus years of his career fighting for a voice for the arts at the table of the great social and political decisions. And then he said, finally, in my older age, I suddenly realized that actually we are the table. And what he means is we are the platform where these discussions should take place. We don't need a seat at the table. We are the people who ask the questions, and that's what we're here for as art. So in that respect, I think Cecilia follows that absolutely. Not the first person. We played a piece last week, a big, large, multi-dimensional piece called Unearthed, written by Julia Wolfe, New York composer, which was also about the climate emergency that we face also. So, and there are other numerous examples around composers who will take issues of the current period and
Michael Tippett, Child of Our Time.
Absolutely.
Shostakovich, practically everything he wrote.
Yeah.
And so on and so
yeah,
on.
and so on and so on. So anyway, we look forward to that. And we finish our concert with one of my favorite Beethoven symphonies, and it's one that doesn't get played a huge amount. And I wonder if we might talk about that a little bit, because the Fourth Symphony was smack in the middle of his what we might call heroic period, where between the Eroica Symphony and, of course, the iconic Fifth Symphony that followed. And there's a common sort of conception, I think, publicly, that the odd-numbered ones are stronger than the even-numbered ones. And we might want to dispute that. Certainly the Pastoral is not a weaker symphony by any stretch of the imagination. But I would also dispute this piece as a weak piece also. And I wonder if you had any comments on that, Sakari. You conduct all of the Beethoven symphonies. Rose, you play all the Beethoven symphonies. What's that relationship like for the Fourth Symphony?
Yes, the Fourth Symphony is a sunny piece. For certainly for Beethoven, there's no question about that. And in my interpretation, I'm sort of trying to dig out some slightly sinister undercurrents in the piece by bringing out some dissonances that might, need a bit of help to really come out of the texture. But of course, the message of the piece is this kind of incredible joy and elation and humor. And Beethoven was a great humorist in his music. It's often forgotten that even the heroic pieces contain humoristic passages and episodes, and it was one very important factor in Beethoven's style of writing.
And for a violinist especially, but probably the whole orchestra, Rose, they're not easy, these pieces. They're I'll let you say something about that.
No, Beethoven isn't easy to play. But actually, this is my first time. This will be my first time tonight playing the Fourth Symphony.
Oh, fantastic!
And I'm so looking forward to it and it being with you, Sakari. And it's so joyful it feels like chamber music, and it partly sort of fiendish to play as well. But the most beautiful second movement. It's always, I suppose, it's part of the purpose of a musician's life with these great composers to kind of tick another one off the list in the set of symphonies or sort of great works, and it'll be great to say so this evening. So
I love the smile on your face, because Sakari and I have been doing this for a long time, and it's so nice to remember playing something for the first time. Actually, it is it's a great thrill actually to have that. I'm this piece especially, actually, for me. You mentioned chamber music. One of the things that I think of immediately when I think of this piece, and maybe this First and Second Symphony also, is his relationship with Haydn. And I wonder if you might say something about that, Sakari. He certainly was influenced by Haydn. Are these pieces have Haydnesque elements, but they also have things that are not Haydn? I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah. Everyone was influenced by Papa Haydn in those days. Everyone who composed, at least in Vienna and in the proximity. And Haydn famously also apparently visited a rehearsal of Beethoven's previous Eroica Symphony, the Third Symphony, and sat there for 20 minutes and then walked away, shaking his head. and maybe I like to think there's of course no evidence that sort of Beethoven was slightly maybe taken aback by that, and maybe he wanted to kind of redeem himself by writing this Fourth Symphony with this kind of the structure is very Haydn-like, because
a slow introduction,
as most of Haydn's especially later symphonies start with a slow introduction. which has a very different character to the main character of the piece. So the introduction is mysterious, it's brooding, it's searching, it doesn't quite find its way until that moment where suddenly, as I like to imagine it, the giant wakes up and comes from underground, and you know, and the giant comes out and starts his rumbustious dance, and it's such a big kind of revelation to come to that moment. It's like the lights are suddenly on and there is a party, and the giants are all having fun.
Yeah, fantastic. And in this slow movement has the most beautiful cantabile melody in it, compared to the late string quartets, even, I would even say, in terms of the way it's held together. But it's also underpinned by restlessness. There's something underneath it, isn't there?
There's this rhythm, pom, 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 constantly going on, this dotted rhythm. The second violins actually start the movement by that. And there's a really interesting theory that the great late conductor Carlos Kleiber had about that this is a woman's name. Therese, 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 Therese. Apparently Beethoven had a fling with a lady called Therese in the time. And there is a video of Kleiber trying to explain to the musicians of the Vienna Philharmonic, very conservative people, that this is happening, and they are kind of appalled by it. This can't possibly be true. Our Beethoven.
No, blasphemy.
He was human as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more human than we probably even know, actually. But the piece continues in it's a scherzo, but not a scherzo. But it is a scherzo. Maybe we might want to call it.
Yes, third movement. Yeah, he was still sort of wavering between scherzo and menuet. He wanted to call it menuet, but then he realized it's much too quick for a menuet. So he then grudgingly changed the name to scherzo. But the scherzo of the first symphony, which is also quick, is called menuet. It has nothing to do with a menuet.
Yeah.
But maybe this is also from the Haydn tradition, because Haydn symphonies and also Mozart's, they often contain a menuet as a third movement.
Yeah. And there's a couple of million notes in the last movement, isn't that right, Rose?
There are a few, yeah. Try to get most of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to one of the bassoon players recently, because there's a really almost impossible bassoon section in there with... Yeah.
It goes past so quickly. You don't even realize it's
super challenging.
Yes.
So anyway, but it's a very exciting, very sunny piece. And in that sense, I think you're going to journey on this whole concert from one extreme to the other. So I hope you really enjoy it. We do have some time for some questions. And I wonder if there are... I will repeat the questions here so that we have it for the recording. Thank you. Very good question. The number of concerts in a year, God, I have to total all of them up. I'll tell you what we do. We do 24 Barbican performances. We do 12 proms. We are the resident orchestra in the BBC proms. We do. Can you do the sums for me as we go? And then we do roughly 15 or 16 studio concerts in Maida Vale Studios, but only until the end of the summer, when we are moving out of Maida Vale and into new built studio, which will be at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in Stratford in East London. Of course, it's not quite ready, so we don't know exactly when we'll play our first concert there, and we will be peripatetic in the meantime, and would love to come back and play for you again as much as possible. So I think we do in the region of, I would say, and then touring, which are recorded as well, and other performances across the UK. It's in the region of 80 to 100 broadcasts a year, and in total concerts. And then on top of that, we have other work we're doing with young people, families, schools, early years concerts, and learning and engagement work as well. Any other questions? No. In that case, I will say thank you very much for coming along to this talk. Thanks to my guests, Rose and Sakari, for sharing their thoughts with you. And I hope you enjoy the concert very much, and look forward to seeing you again soon in Basingstoke. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.